World Affairs Roundup, next on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs at UWM and Milwaukee Public Television present International Focus, a global magazine linking Wisconsin and the world.
Welcome to International Focus. I'm Doug Savage from the Institute of World Affairs at UWM with a New Year's edition of our World Affairs Roundup. I've asked our prescient panel of pundits to scan the foreign policy horizon and identify the top 5 issues to watch in the months ahead. While there's considerable overlap, each of our experts has included something different on his or her list. Here to provide their analyses of what will keep the midnight oil burning in the Oval Office in 2011 are John Katzka, a retired U.S. Foreign Service officer who has conducted public diplomacy for the Department of State on 4 continents. Ann Hamilton, political scientist and coordinator of international studies at UW-Whitewater, who also served in the U.S. Foreign Service. And Robert Kraig, author of a number of articles and books dealing with the history and politics of American foreign policy. He currently serves as Executive Director of Citizen Action of Wisconsin. Well, Happy New Year. Welcome back, everyone.
New Year.
Well, on your list you were commissioned to come up with, there's really only one topic that each of you included, and not surprisingly, that's the situation in Afghanistan and Pakistan. So I'd like to start with that, if we could. John, first of all, probably the big decision point coming up on that front this year is the administration's announced beginning of a withdrawal in July of this year. Has the Obama administration, since making that statement, backed away from it?
Well, as I understand it, yes, they have. They are moving to the commanders, giving the commanders a certain amount of flexibility in determining what that deadline will be.
And Ann, is this a good thing?
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, we're sending a lot of mixed messages. We have this the 2011 deadline that we've given, and then we've also, there's been the NATO announcement that they will finish their mission there by 2014, but then Obama has said, well, we will continue to keep troops there past 2014 if in fact we think that the security situation warrants it. So that we don't really have any end date in sight, in the sense that it could start as early as June or July, but it could go past 2014. So, and we're already 10 years into this.
Well, and Robert, obviously these decisions are being made in the context of a very different Congress. Now, how will the new House and the new Senate likely view a withdrawal or a backing away from a withdrawal?
Well, obviously the Republicans now control the House of Representatives, and they have much closer margin in the minority in the Senate, and they strongly support not having deadlines. Their whole rap is that somehow having the deadlines gives greater confidence to the enemy, causes the Taliban to decide to just wait us out, etc. But I mean, the president has substantial authority here. He's probably thinking a lot, though, where the 2012 election starts to come into play. The whole Afghan strategy came out of the 2008 election as a way to not look soft on terrorism while withdrawing partially from Iraq. It still has no real, it's not a strategy that actually relates to stopping terrorism in a legitimate way. The Al-Qaeda is not there. They don't know how to extricate themselves. They don't want to look weak. We can't afford the war. I think they need to figure out a way to cut their losses, because there's no outcome here that would achieve any clear policy goal, and certainly not in terms of making the world safer from terrorism.
Well, there's the U.S. policy goals, and then obviously there are a number of other players on the horizon. John, let's take a look at some of the other folks involved.
Okay. Well, let's start with Pakistan, which has an overwhelming desire to be able to control everything going on in Afghanistan, as well as an overwhelming desire to see India's hand everywhere in every action in this relationship. And India is becoming an increasingly larger player in the Afghan, and this is being encouraged by Karzai and the Afghan government. Iran is a player here as well, even though that there is a traditional hatred of the Sunnis on the part of the Shia Persians. What we're seeing now is that they are providing sanctuary and support for Taliban in the western part of Afghanistan. They want to keep active in this, and be able to be part of whatever solution occurs when the West withdraws. And then we have Russia, who in this particular case has a strong interest as it extends through the stands, the Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan in this part of the world. But also this is also a spoiler role that Russia can play in this. China's role has been more that they have been a traditional supporter of Pakistan, but that they may evolve as they begin to exercise more political and military interests outside of their own area into something more of a player.
Well, the geopolitical situation is critically important, and there can't be any, as John was explaining, each player has an important role to play in the sense of the neighboring countries and the major powers in the world. But what's going on in the ground there domestically is, there are so many problems that have come out between the results of the elections that took place in September revealed what people already knew, but that there's a huge divide between the Pashtuns and the other ethnic groups in the country. They've lost seats in the parliament. They no longer dominate the officer corps in the military. And Karzai is working with the Pashtuns, but there's a lot of resentment against the Pashtuns. So there's a lot of divisions within the country, and the United States has always, well not always, recently taken the position that we can't win there militarily. We have to provide the circumstances under which we can leave the country. I mean, hopefully we could leave the country with it having its ability to defend itself and to govern itself, and we're so far away from that in terms of the extent to which we've, the security forces there are ready to take over if we were to leave. And
so here's a sort of bottom line question for all of you with a brief answer. Is giving this current strategy more time, as delaying the withdrawal would seem to do, a good thing?
Well, because we don't have an answer, because we don't know, we don't have a solution, we haven't got the partners to be able to be willing to find common ground. I would say cutting our losses would be an option, but not necessarily the best one.
I think that the idea that has been pushed of trying to negotiate with the Taliban, I think that sooner or later that's going to have to happen, and I think that they should be, I'm sure they're probably working on that already, but I think that's what they have to do.
We're going to need to exit. It's already the longest American war. 2014 will not be better than 2011, so we might as well cut our losses, but we're going to have to negotiate with the more reasonable elements of the Taliban, and that's a very broad, diverse group. It's not, it's been characterized as something like Al-Qaeda. That's not the case at all, and we might as well stop spending the blood and treasure of the country and exit and come to a resolution. Well,
moving on now to the stories in which each of you had your own inclusion on your list. John, we'll start with you. You said U.S.-Russian relations are something to watch.
Yeah, and it was partly for sentimental reasons. I spent a lot of time over in that part of the world. But Russia, we have misread Russia, in my opinion, badly since the collapse of the Soviet Union, possibly before that as well. We keep wanting to remake Russia into our own image and want them to behave like we do. And they have there's no tradition of democracy or of market economics there. Yes, there are little pieces of it that go on in some of the cities, but it has not reached in any way conspicuous mass to be able to say that this is what defines the country. And so stability and law and order are much more important than individual rights and human rights to many Russians, or certainly to the majority of Russians in the country. So Putin's rise is not something that he grabbed. It was something that they willingly gave him in terms of that position. Well, generally the West has been very critical of Putin and his procedures. And so therefore Russia has been reacting to this and often plays the role of a spoiler in a number of different kinds of negotiations. They are now, in terms of energy and their energy again, they're pumping more and more oil because the prices are going up, and they're refilling their treasury, and they have a certain hold over Western Europe in terms of the energy that they're supplying. And they just will be increasingly and continue to be a major player. Now, for the United States, how do we react to this? And in some ways, this is the same example that we're looking at in China. We have certain strategic interests that we have with both the Chinese and the Russians. We also have concerns about their behavior on a number of accounts. And this is the hard part of this, because there's no right or wrong answer to this. There's just different outcomes depending upon which direction you take. If you support human rights and democracy and market economics, we're going to run into buzzsaws in both places, and we may not be able to accomplish certain things like, for example, on the Middle East, or on terrorism, or on drugs.
Well, you know, and that brings up a point. You know, the administration has been criticized in some circles for basically trying to have this strategic partnership on issues external to the region with Russia, notably with Iran, with Afghanistan, some of the other issues, at the expense of our traditional European allies. Do you think that's been the case, and how does that look in the coming year?
Well, I think that the talk now is to try and get Russia to work more closely with, the Europeans to embrace Russia in the context of NATO and think more about Russia playing a more constructive role in the context of NATO. I don't know the extent to which, I think that Russia wants to be, as John, I think that John is right about the fact that we've misread Russia. I think that Russia wants to be perceived as strong a power as the United States. And it wants to be seen as a major player, and we have not been sensitive enough to that. So we have to deal with them too, with respect to the European countries as well, acknowledging almost their special role in world politics, and not just see them as another European power that can be absorbed into NATO and be just one of the countries of NATO, because they're not going to buy that. They want to be given a role. They want to have access to the positive sides of missile defense, but they want to be seen as on a par with us and not as just another European power. And so it's a sensitive issue there.
And is it a zero-sum game? Are we either playing nicely with the rest of Europe or the Russians? Can we do both?
I don't think it needs to be, but it depends how we play it. I mean, this is one area where Obama's strategy of engagement has borne some fruit, as far as Russia being helpful on Korea and Iran, and as far as the START treaty. So there's been some, but the bigger question, the harder question, is engagement with Europe and how they fit in with Europe. I think that, and obviously the encroachment of NATO onto their old Eastern European empire has been very upsetting to Russia. And so, and missile defense is upsetting to Russia, and but we should continue this engagement process to work that through. The missile defense thing is ridiculous in a way, because the technology doesn't work, but they're terrified of it because it's the one thing they have is the ability is that they're a major nuclear power, and so we really should give it away, because it really isn't worth very much. But we have strong military industrial complex and military contractor interests in spending billions of dollars in building the thing. But it is one of the major impediments. We'll
have to leave Russia there. We'll have more after a break. We'll be right back with more International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back to International Focus. We're looking at some stories in the coming year that will occupy our foreign policy pundits. And your special story was Sudan.
Yes, well, on Sunday, Sudan is going to hold a referendum to see whether or not the people of southern Sudan want to become their own country, have their own state. And this is a major event because well, it would create a new state, which is always a major event in the international arena. And it's also a very interesting event because it's the culmination of many years of negotiations involving many, many parties. It's the result of a peace agreement that was reached in 2005 between northern and southern Sudan.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about that conflict historically?
Well, it's a conflict that has its roots in colonial times, and the north is largely made up. The north is the more populous area of the country. It's about the population of the country is a little over 40 million, 30 million of which live in the north, and they are mostly Muslim, Arab-speaking, or as they say, Arabized populations, whereas in the south, they're black Africans who follow traditional religions, and some of whom have converted to Christianity. So and historically, there's been a big difference between the north and the south, with the north having most of the power.
Where's the oil?
The oil is largely in the south, but it wasn't discovered till 1979. And they achieved independence in '56, and the differences between the North and the South predate all of this. So the oil just is a complicating but important factor. And they've been in civil war almost, I think, for all of but 11 years of their independence, which occurred in 1956. So it's really a large issue. Most of the attention in the West has been on Darfur, which is related, but not this particular issue, the genocide in Darfur. So they're going to have a referendum which was set up as one of the provisions of the 2005 peace treaty, and everybody thought that this would not come off, but it is. And Bashir, the president of Sudan, has recently said that he will accept the results. Which is an interesting development. I chose it as a really important issue, not only because I think it's important when a new state comes into being, but I think it's important when it comes into being through a peaceful process. And it's also an issue to which the United States and many other countries around the world have devoted a tremendous amount of attention. This has been something that it started before the Obama administration. The Bush administration also paid a certain amount of attention to this. And they have Hillary Clinton, Susan Rice, both the Secretary of State and the UN ambassador have personally committed to this. Over 100, one of the reports I read said over 100 U.S. officials are involved in this every single day. All the permanent members of the Security Council, all the African countries. It's this huge web of negotiations that have gone on for a long time. So it's kind of a test of multilateral cooperation. Can this work? And an African leader said that he thought this was terribly important because if this unravels, it's kind of a symbol of all of Africa. And you can see parallels between the Sudan situation and the Nigerian situation, for example. And the unrest that will result will be felt all over Africa. So it's partly symbolic, but also really important from a security perspective and from an economic perspective because of all the oil wealth and the interests that are involved there.
Well, and Robert, assuming the referendum goes in favor of those who would like to split the country, what would those two entities look like?
Yeah, there's not much question about how the vote will turn, except you need 60% of registered voters to vote, which is very hard given how poor and undeveloped the South is. Well, it's not going to be like North Dakota and South Dakota. There's going to be much more dramatic differences here. And so, as Ann was pointing out, you have a black African Christian or animist South, but it has oil wealth depending on the border, and that may be an intention afterwards. There'll be a lot of issues around who has access to the oil, and you may have Bashir has said that he will make them a more fundamentalist Muslim country and impose fundamentalist law in the north. And so they had a bout of that before where there was tremendous oppression. So there's fear about that. There's some who believe that won't happen again because there's been development of a more cosmopolitan middle class in the north. But hard to say. You could have a more hardline Muslim state in the north.
Well, one aspect of this that I find interesting is China, among others, have been very supportive of the Khartoum government, largely because they're interested in the resources. What happens to...
There's another reason China does that. China traditionally will support all governments in terms of breakaway
against separatism. But
against separatism.
What happens to the Bashir government if they are no longer the ones in control of the oil?
Well, I think that this is one of the really interesting questions about this, because the Bashir government is, being squeezed on all sides, and actually, the North and the South need to cooperate for both entities to survive. So some people would say, oh, this will be really good because Bashir will be, this is the beginning of the end for Bashir. But actually, in terms of stability in the region, you need the North and the South to cooperate and work together, so that I actually think that at this point, everybody's trying to ensure stability as opposed to the demise of Bashir. But I think that's a really important issue. And I think China is also working behind the scenes on this to make sure that it doesn't all fall apart, because some people are saying maybe this will be, when the referendum occurs, it's going to take 7 days to know the results, but that he could be overthrown, the day after the results are known, which would probably not be a good thing, despite all of the negatives against him.
Well, we'd be remiss, Robert, if we didn't give you your moment in the sun. On your list was the inexorable decline of U.S. influence in the world. So tell us why this is the story to watch.
Well, speaking of moments in the sun, look, we came out of World War II as by far the dominant power, right, and built our foreign policy and our military establishment on that basis. And we clearly do not have the same hegemony that we once had, and our whole force posture in terms of military bases around the world, our proclivity to use force to try to solve international relations problems is based on a containment of Stalin model, where we had George Marshall and Dean Acheson and George Kennan running our foreign policy. And so when you hear all the discussion about not only about trade deficits, but about our fiscal crisis and long-term deficits, about the role of the dollar, et cetera, it really speaks to the fact that we can't fulfill all the commitments we're trying to fulfill anymore. And we're still going to be perhaps the leading power in the world, but we're going to have less relative influence. There are other players like China emerging. And so we need to right-size our commitments to meet our actual economic prowess. It doesn't mean that we're going to become a third-rate power. We're going to be a first-rate power for a long time, but we cannot afford to fight two wars against terrorism that don't reduce terrorism at all. We can't afford to have a containment force structure around the world. The talk now is, well, we'll have to cut things like Social Security and Medicare and other key social programs. The problem is we don't invest in our economy. It actually accelerates our relative decline. And so we're making this, and quite frankly, the biggest threat to the United States is our inability to govern ourselves, the complete gridlock, and the fact that we have one part of our governing system right now that doesn't believe that we should essentially invest in our economy, invest in our long-term strength, and a corporate order that frankly is more interested in profits they can make all over the world than any loyalty to the country. And so that's why globalization has undermined jobs to a great degree. I think it's a legitimate critique of how
it's a point of view.
Of exactly what's happened geopolitically to us and to American government in the last 20 to 30 years. But anyway, I think most people on the spectrum think we are reaching a situation where that we have to make choices, where we can't keep doing all the things we're doing domestically in foreign policy. What you should do is the question, but I think there's a broad agreement on reaching a real critical limits to what we can do, and having to make real choices that we haven't had to make since World War II.
Well, we have just a few minutes left, John. I'm sure you'd like to jump in. Are we in decline in some existential way?
The U.S. rose to world power during the industrial age. We are now transiting to the information age. We don't know what are going to be the criteria for power in this new age. Nation states may disappear as we know them, and we may come up with new definitions of how we're going to govern each other. That's one point. Second, when do we start talking about the decline? Are we talking in the time frame since the end of the Cold War, when we became the sole superpower? Well, yeah, we're going to decline from that position because the world abhors a vacuum, and there will be other powers that are going to rise up. The BRICS have come immediately to mind: Brazil, Russia, India, and China as competitors in this process. So let me leave it there and give Anne a chance to say a last word.
I'm not really too troubled by the idea of decline, because I think that we are, I mean, if you take what Robert said, we're overstretched. We've got too many military commitments, and I think that we have to sit back and think, what kind of country do we want to look like? And I mean, there are a lot of countries around the world, the Scandinavian countries come to mind for me, who are very prosperous countries who pursue some really good things in foreign policy, and they're not second-rate at all, but they're not out there militarily all the time. So that if we can retrench a little bit, stay true to our values, we'll still be a great power, but it'll be a different kind of power.
Well, there you go. The last word from Ann Hamilton to our viewers. We'll see you next time on International Focus.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website.